SB 384. And for that consideration, I'll ask the reviser to please review.
The chairman, members of the committee, you have the memo giving you a summary of the bill in front of you. I think for the committee's understanding of this legislation where it stands now, I should probably just give you a narrative of how it got to where it is. The original bill was introduced to address an issue in the statute, in the EMS statutes, that by statute, at least one of the individuals who staffs an ambulance has to be a certified medical provider. The statute provides which of those certified medical providers are qualified under that statute. The EMS board has adopted a regulation that requires both individuals that staff the ambulance to meet those qualifications, to be a certified medical provider as specified in the statute. What that done is that has created a problem in rural districts of finding sufficient staffing for ambulances that have both individuals meeting that qualification. The board has granted variances to that regulation, but by their own statutory regulatory authority, those variances have to have a fixed expiration. They can only be for a certain time. They can only be temporary. And so the bill was originally introduced to address a statutory issue, and it was a proposal to make that statutory of only one needs to be certified applicable absolutely within rural districts. So rural ambulance service providers would only have to have one individual meet that certified medical provider qualification. And as the testimony came through on the Senate Local Government Committee, both last session and this session, as this bill has been reintroduced this year, the variance grant became an issue in the fact that the EMS board was granting variances, but only on a temporary basis. And so the solution that the Senate Local Government Committee adopted is the Senate Bill 384, as you see before you. And what this bill would do is goes into the EMS board's regulatory authority. And on page 2, starting line 15, the board can grant a variance from the regulation that's implementing that certified medical provider statute on a permanent basis. So they no longer have to require the ambulance provider to come back every year or every 2 years and reapply for a new variance from the regulation. They can apply once, be granted a permanent variance from that regulation, and then only have to staff their ambulance with one certified medical provider, as long as they comply with all the other conditions of the variance that's been granted by the EMS board. And I'll defer to the EMS board on what those other requirements and conditions are when they issue a variance from the regulation. So that was the solution. It was adopted by the Senate Local Government Committee. If you're curious about what these certified medical provider qualifications are, that is still in the bill on page 4 of the bill. That statute 65-6135 is still amended simply to clean up some language with respect to how we define a physician. And so the person shall be an EMS provider who's certified according to the statutes, or a physician who's licensed by the Board of Healing Arts to practice medicine and surgery. Could be a physician assistant, could be an advanced practice registered nurse, or could be a professional nurse. So as long as the individual meets any of those qualifications, they meet the statute, and at least one of the individuals on the ambulance has to meet that statute. And then, of course, there are variances from the EMS board's regulation requiring both individuals to meet that statute. This change will go into place on July 1st of this year. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, with respect to the technical details, we do have the EMS board here today testifying, and so you can refer those questions to him.
Any questions for the reviser? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you, sir. I'd like to recognize Sean Gatewood, Kansas EMS Association, if you are here. Yeah. Not here. Okay. We will move on to Joseph House, Director of Emergency Medical Services Board. Yes, sir.
Joe House, the executive director of the Emergency Medical Services Board. If it would be okay, perhaps the league coming forward, since they introduced the bill, might be more appropriate prior to our testimony.
Be happy to do that. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Joseph. All right, Spencer, League of Municipalities. Thank you, Spencer.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. Jason did a pretty good job of giving you sort of the very brief history of a long odyssey over the last year. And so I'll just try to fill in some of those gaps. As he said, there's a state statute, rules and regs at one point went beyond that state statute. And our struggle was the balance between, look, Olathe, Topeka, Junction City is probably never going to use this variance, right? We're not going to have the staffing issues that rural communities are having. The problem became we have rural communities that if they only have, let's say, and I'm using some random, but 4 EMS individuals, if 2 of them have to leave the site for a facility transport for a day, because these transports aren't always just down the road. In many cases, they're to Oklahoma or Colorado or Nebraska. They're across a state line to deliver folks from one place to another. That puts those people out of service for, if not a whole day, possibly 2+ days. So that leaves you with just those 2 folks behind. So our rural community said, we want to find the balance between making sure we're not losing our emergency medical folks for these transports, but also making sure that the people on those transports are taken care of. And so our thought was, let's just go back to the state statute as it is written to make sure that there is an absolutely qualified person in the back of that transport, while the driver still has to be a qualified driver. And as you'll see in our testimony, many of these communities also believe that they will give those individuals basic medical training, first aid, that kind of training. But at least then they're not taking both of those professionals out of service. So that was the genesis of this. We changed this because, and I know regardless of the level of government, we don't always do this, but we found the simplest solution. And that is, we learned through this process that there is a state statute that says when an agency gives a variance of any kind, it has to have an end date. That's state law. So we went and said, well, what if we just removed that on this one statute, on this one piece of the process, that they didn't have to have an end date? And that benefits both sides for this reason. The EMS board has created a variance that our cities are happy with and that they do qualify for. And the process through some refinement is one that our cities are fine with. And by removing the variance, the EMS board still has oversight that they need. So if they ever need to go, if someone's violating it, they can go in and revoke that variance and say, nope, you violated the rules. We still have the authority. But our folks are happy with removing that deadline because having to come back every 12 months doesn't give them the long-term stability they need for hiring people, for setting up how the system's going to work. It gives them some instability of knowing, if I got to go back every 12 months and what if we don't get it? That created some issues there and some problems there. So this solution solves that problem. So it's permanent only in the sense that the EMS board still has authority and oversight to make sure it's being followed correctly. So it's not permanent that they can't ever revoke it, but it is permanent in the sense that they don't have to come back every 12 months. And that for us was the simplest solution because the cities are happy with the variance and we didn't want to overstep the EMS board's authority, but we wanted to solve this very real practical problem. And the last thing I'll say is, because I like to clarify this does not impact emergency services. This is all about interfacility transports and a few other, minor is probably not the right word, minor services, but we're not trying to impede emergency services to that. So we did work on this for a while. We came to a consensus that this was the right way to go, and we're hoping it works out. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Spencer. Is there any questions for Mr. Duncan? Appreciate your extra explanation. Now, if Joseph, if you're available, and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joseph House, the Executive Director of the Emergency Medical Services Board, and thank you for indulging my request to have the league speak before, because I do offer a great background going into this. So we are in support of Senate Bill 384 as it sits before you today. It is a very good compromise back and forth. We do believe that variance process is working. We have 7 ambulance services that have requested that. We have 5 of those that have been approved to use it. The other 2 we're waiting on their to complete the training necessary for that second person. There has been just a slight adjustment to what you've heard previously, in that we require 2 people on that list. That's not necessarily true. We require 2 EMS providers, but there is one level of provider that we certify that's not listed in the statute. So emergency medical responder is a level that we license and that we certify, but that individual does not appear in 656135A. We allow that individual to act as a second EMS provider certified by us on an ambulance. So there still has to be an EMT or an advanced EMT or a paramedic or a doctor, nurse, whatever. But this emergency medical responder, we do allow to count as that second provider. So that's our just a slight little difference there. There are 2 certified people, one of which has to be that EMT, AEMT, paramedic, nurse, physician assistant, advanced practice registered nurse. But the second one can be emergency medical responder. We don't have a lot of them in the state of Kansas, which is a concern for us as a board, because that level is designed to be what this variance is really coming down to. And that's an individual that can operate an ambulance, that knows enough to help the hands in the back, because it does take 2 people to load a patient into the back of an ambulance. It does take 2 people to just manipulate and go through. It takes 2 people to check medications and make sure that the right thing is being done for the patient and that check. So we're very ecstatic with the variance process of allowing that to continue to function, allowing that to continue to work. We believe that it does allow those communities that are definitely in need of that assistance to grant them another alternative. Making that a permanent thing, that's great. No concerns there whatsoever from the board standpoint in moving forward. And so we are very happy with Senate Bill 384 where it's at right now. Allows us to continue to study. And the best part about it is, as we're continuing to see this, if we see that this isn't working, we should be able to come back to you with a workable solution to fix this in legislation, and or say that this does work. Let's make this the law moving forward. So we're very excited to bring that back to you. Happy to answer any questions you may have about this or the variance process.
If you could hang in there. Any questions from Mr. House? Yes, Ranking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So now I'm a little bit lost. Your certified required person could be like an APRN, LPN, RN, and your second person needs to be an EMR or could just be a certified driver?
So thank you for the question. With the variance, it could be a driver that has certain certain trainings. And so we do list out those trainings within the variance as to what needs to be achieved. It's basically everything a bystander can do today. So stop the bleed, administer naloxone, CPR, AED, first aid, general things that happen with an ambulance, like confidentiality. So they do need to understand workplace hazards that exist in the back of an ambulance. They also need to understand data protections and again, patient confidentiality. Those are the main levels that have to be addressed. But we allow that to be addressed by the ambulance service.
Okay, so the driver must have medical training of some sort for you to approve it.
Received by the service, yes.
Okay.
And Representative Essex and Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick thanks for being here today. Just a quick clarification. Larger cities, I mean, this is really business as usual, right? This is more of a rural solution. Is that what it was designed to do, is more for those? I mean, the difference between Eastern Kansas and Western is probably different on how the variances are given. Do you understand my question? Okay.
Thank you, Representative. So I will say that our urban services are struggling just as much for staffing. The fact is, though, they're struggling for staffing of 4 to 5 ambulances, whereas our rural services are struggling to staff 1 ambulance. The staffing issues are consistent across the state. It's not due to a lack of licensed persons. It's due to a lack of licensed persons willing to work on an ambulance. So we understand that issue is going to continue to be out there. The variance itself does not limit itself to a population size. The board has asserted the entire time that it's either safe to do this or it's not safe to do this for the public. And so where you live should not necessarily matters upon what emergency service is available for you. So the variance itself has no population requirement whatsoever, just a hardship within the staffing side of things.
Representative Gardner, then Representative Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us just a brief synopsis of, excuse me very much. How much time does it take to get these minimum requirements, and what is the procedure so that we can have a certified driver? And do they have to be employed full-time, or can we employ them as on a part-time or as needed basis, or doing transfers?
Great question, Representative. One on the, I'll answer your second question first. How about that? So how they're staffed, whether it's full-time, part-time, as needed, is completely left up to the ambulance service. However, they want to utilize that individual. It's what we've seen with the 7 services that have requested so far. They're going to keep it consistent with their current staffing model. So if they have as needed or volunteer individuals that are EMS providers, they're also using these drivers in that same type of role and going through. As far as how long does it take to get the training, the longest training provided within the 5 that have gone through that right now has been 6 hours. So they come in for a day, they just go through the topics as they are. The vast majority of these things are things that can be captured just on their own. So it's really just a matter of coming into the ambulance service and them ensuring that they know exactly what they needed to do for that. So naloxone administration takes 15 minutes to instruct. CPR first aid about an hour.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask one more question then?
Certainly.
What are the qualifications to administer that training? Can that be done at the local hospital or the local county level, or do they have to go to state certified training for the minimum training necessary to be a driver in a transfer ambulance?
Great question, Representative. And we have left the variances all so far been done at a local level. And that's, we ask them to, the services applying to it, to tell us how they're going to do it. All 5 have done it through a local in-service. The 2 that have not yet done it plan to do it through a local service in-service. It's not a state required training.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Barth.
Thank you, Chairman Berquist. Joseph, thank you for being here. I have a question because I was going through the neutral testimony from the American Heart Association from Carrie Rinker. And she brought up a point in her testimony that I thought would be appropriate for maybe you to help with answering. The American Heart Association recommends that 911 telecommuters that they dispatch for emergency medical conditions be trained in the telecommuter CPR training. Is that standard? Do they normally do that anyway? Or are we, like, how does that happen? I'm not familiar with the 911 and what they're doing. Is it different in the rural areas versus where, city populations, things like that? Could you help me understand that, please? Thanks.
Thank you. I'll do my best. So on the emergency medical dispatching side of things, that's typically within our areas a law enforcement function in almost all of our jurisdictions across the state. The training for those telecommunication specialists does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Most of those are what we call emergency medical dispatching protocols that are followed, which do have telephone CPR and train those communicators to be able to basically direct how CPR is done across the phone. Not all of our jurisdictions do that within the state of Kansas. There's also no oversight yet of the 911 telecommunications side, except for best practices and such. Emergency medical dispatching training is expensive, extremely expensive, to the point at which it's fairly cost prohibitive to some of our smaller communities, especially given the fact that frequency of use is not necessarily as high. And it does require fairly frequent use in order to become proficient at it. Otherwise, you sit here. Easiest way to describe it is they're sitting with a set of cards in front of them, and they go through to try to figure out which card it's going through and which set of questions. There's quite a learning curve to get there, but once done, it's very effective. We actually see a quicker access to appropriate care when it's used. And so we are working with our 911 coordinating council to try to push that a little bit more, but there is no regulatory or statutory oversight yet. I would imagine, I believe you're hearing a bill that will deal with developing a 911 coordinating board out of that. And that is one of the things I know that will be on their topics to discuss.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions? Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. House, thanks for being here today. Just a question maybe of you, but one, get your reaction to maybe some concern. Reading the supplemental note on this particular bill, the League of Municipalities and Kansas Association of Counties indicated that the bill would reduce emergency medical service staffing costs for local governments. This bill obviously is going to be one that's going to be used in trying to take care of a problem in rural Kansas, but obviously it is going to be a bill that can be used for urban communities also, correct? I mean, it can, and
You are correct, it can, yes.
okay. I just, when we talk about level of staffing, do you have concern about that?
I do. I think our biggest concern, and this is it's a very interesting thing, are more rural communities. And by more rural, the further west you go of Highway 81, the more nervous they are of applying this variance. Not because they're not struggling with staffing, because they are, but because those providers don't necessarily feel as comfortable being the only individual on an ambulance with EMS knowledge. And so it's a comfort level. That was actually when we went out, west of Hayes, west of Garden City, discussing this with them. Their concerns were the fact of, I'm going to be out 35, 40 minutes from somewhere, and I'm it. And I have nothing to bounce anything off of anyone, although we've encouraged them. Well, contact your hospitals, talk with your providers, go through, discuss with that. We've looked at some options for telemedicine and such to try to help with the staffing and to try to alleviate those concerns. But we do have concern that this will reduce staffing to the point at which there will be a critical failure.
Okay. Just one follow-up, if I could, Chairman. Okay, well, when you come back in a year or so and tell us how great this thing's doing and we want to make this permanent, one of the things that I would like to know is how we have changed staffing levels statewide. I think that would be something that'd be very important. At the same time, I kind of like to know, are we really using it as a cost savings in some of our bigger urban areas? So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Barth.
Thank you, Chairman Berquist, and thanks again, Joseph. I think getting emergency care to people is really important. I understand, excuse me, that folks might be nervous. I mean, you're trying to save lives, and a lot of times these folks, without having life-saving, would maybe not survive. So I understand the magnitude of that. You mentioned something when you were just talking there about calling hospitals in rural Kansas. I don't know that there's always cell phone reception that's really good. Do they use satellite phones? How do they ensure that they'll have access to hospitals for support?
Great question. So the legislature approved the build out of FirstNet. I will tell you that the FirstNet coverage within the state of Kansas, which is cellular coverage, covers at least 99.5% of the state. So I have a FirstNet phone on me. Do I have blackout areas? I have about 150 feet of blackout area that is currently there. But with the FirstNet as a first responder network, is available to every ambulance service in the state for them to jump onto. It is a cellular carrier. They have mobile deployables that they set out. The state of Kansas is far ahead of the rest of the country in a build out for FirstNet. So we're very, very blessed to have that within our state.
Okay, I do have one follow-up question, if you don't mind. That's fantastic news. Okay. The other question is on the FTEs with the estimate from Secretary Profit on 3 FTEs needed for this. And I don't quite understand the need for those 3. Can you provide a little bit more why we're going to need 3? When in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we have less, you're going to need less people. This is going to save money a little bit to solve a problem. So can you explain that, please?
And great question. I was kind of anticipating that was going to come up. I don't believe that there's been a revised fiscal note since the bill was amended. With that, I can say because the 3 FTEs were for our position, that was under the old language within the bill, which the patchwork that it created, where we were going to have to monitor when they were moving in and out of communities of less than 50,000, was going to require us to monitor ambulance routing during transports. And there's roughly about 280,000 transports a year that we would have had to been able to track exactly where they were traveling to find when they were compliant, when they were not. That was the 3 FTEs. With that being stricken out of this bill, the revised fiscal estimate should show nothing.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else from Mr. House? If not, we will move on to Sean Gatewood on the EMS Association, Kansas EMS. Thank you for being here, Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Happy to be here before you today representing the industry, the Kansas EMS Association. We represent ambulance services and their personnel all over the state. And we just wanted to come forward today to say that we support this compromise bill. The issue has been before the legislature for the past 5, 6, 7 years, something like that, to address EMS staffing in rural and frontier portions of the state. And we felt like this was a fairly simple solution that could help out our folks that are having those struggles while still protecting and maintaining the standard of care for those that we serve. So I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time, and I apologize for my tardiness today.
No problem, sir. Any questions? We've been playing it pretty good. All right,
sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Now we have only proponent, written only for Randy Lease, Meade County Commissioner, and you have that testimony. I also have, is there any others who would wish to speak as a proponent on this bill? Yes, sir. So come to the microphone and thank you for being here.
Good morning, committee. Thank you for letting me testify. This is Dr. Droege, Representative District 13. I haven't reread the revised version of the bill, but I was kind of involved in the first endeavor on the bill. And I've heard testimony for EMS discussion and the health and welfare of the humans involved. And we would love to have a whole medical team every time we needed one. Where I'm coming from is what I've heard from my hospital administrator and my county commissioners, that there's 2 EMTs in the county. So if you put them in an ambulance and send them somewhere, you have nobody left in the county to be an EMT in an ambulance call. So what they do is they call them out of another county. So they come out of Elk County to replace the EMT that's gone. And now Elk County is short of EMTs. So the hospital administrator tells me we've sat there for one time as much as 8 hours till we had a crew that could transfer somebody. So I'm not in this committee and I'm not in this position to do much about this, but I wanted to have you guys to have an idea of the other side of it. As how do we move people? I personally, if I'm in a hospital and need to be moved, I would rather somebody that wasn't quite as qualified was driving the ambulance to get me moved. I do want an EMT in the back. I can understand their trepidation of being the only EMT responsible in a call or for a long time, but my profession as a veterinarian for 40 some years, as a professional, often your back is against the wall and you're the one that needs to respond to these things. So yeah, it'd be great to always have somebody to lean on, but that is not always the case. What we need is something that the counties can deal with to pay an EMT program to move people when they need to be moved. Now, I'm not talking critical people. I'm not talking, life threatening. I'm talking people that just need to be transferred. So I just wanted to put that in. If anybody has any questions of where I'm coming from on that, I'd be glad to answer those.
Mr. Bloom.
That's exactly right. That's what happened to our counties. One county couldn't find the other. And most of them are volunteers. They didn't have enough. And then they got dinged by the state because they went ahead and did it just to transport them, which made perfect common sense. Yes, that's the number one problem we're facing. There just aren't the people out there. They're all volunteers. They're not paid. They have other jobs. It's almost impossible to find two that are accredited like they should be. And so they try to get them from another county. That leaves that county short. And it turns out to be a big, big problem.
And the county commissioners told me that the firemen someone would even laugh at him and say, why are you going to make me go do this training? I've got a job. I'm a volunteer fireman. I will drive that thing. And I've got my life-saving education, but I'm not going to go through the rest of that. So county commissioner said it's just creating a problem that they can't get past, and especially the hospital administrator. I don't quite know how they did it, but she said the hospital administrator and a licensed nurse took the ambulance one time to make a transfer because they couldn't get EMTs. Now that's secondhand story, so take it for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you, Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment. I know of one case. It wasn't in Kansas, but because of a shortage of personnel, it was a transfer. I mean, it was a serious condition, but nothing that would warrant a life flight helicopter. But they ended up calling life flight helicopter because they didn't have personnel to transfer them on the ground. And that's, an increase of expense there because life flight is not cheap.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question may be for Joe. Would this Senate Bill 384 as written take care of the problems that you just had communication here?
Thank you for the question. Joe House, Executive Director of the Emergency Medical Services Board. The variance process does cover interfacility transports where the condition doesn't require anything higher than a level of an EMT level care to be done with one person and a trained driver. So the variance process does allow for it. The permanent variance side of it would allow that to continue.
And your follow-up, is your variance process so regimented that it may exclude an example of a local volunteer firefighter who may have some training, but not necessarily maybe all that? Is your variance based on an all or nothing type variance when you issue it, or how's that handled?
So the education required through the variance does all need to be there. But it is relatively, let me just read it real fast for you. Emergency vehicle operations, which a volunteer firefighter would have, first aid, CPR, AED, stop the bleed, naloxone administration, patient confidentiality, and potential workplace hazards. That's what we require. Anything above and beyond that is done at a local level for what they feel is necessary to safely operate.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think it's important because give credit where credit's due. This is the second variance that they've created. The first variance our cities had concerns with about it being a little too rigid or how you got it. They listened to those concerns when they created this variance, and to date, as all the cities as they've reviewed it as we went into this process have said this process is much better and they're good with it. So I always give credit where it's due. They listened, they made those changes, and they made the tweaks that were important to the cities.
Thank you for that extra comment. And yes, Madam Minority.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be for Representative Droege or for Mr. House. So do you feel fairly confident that if we're having a real medical emergency, that life flight would still be called as designated by local emergency personnel?
I think absolutely. I mean, you would expect your medical personnel to make the best judgment that they possibly could in the situation that they're in.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate the all or nothing. And I'm going to have to close now. I have an EMS program in my district at Johnson County Community College, which is amazing. And my husband is the medical director of said program. So I would like
Wow, this is cool.
disclose that and encourage all your people to come to District 16 to get EMS training.
All right. Thank you, Representative.
The opportunity to speak.
All right. We don't have any opposition testimony. Is there anyone wishes to speak in opposition to 384? Not seeing any. We'll close this hearing on SB 384. And Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that we go ahead and suspend the rules and work this bill and do final action on it today.
Been seconded by Representative Underhill. All in favor of suspending the rules and working 384, say aye. All opposed, abstain, and we have a consensus. So we will move on, and you've heard it explained pretty good. Is there any more explanation we need from the reviser? Okay, if not, I'd entertain a motion. Representative Underhill.
Make a motion that we approve Senate Bill 384 favorably.
Okay. And seconded by Representative Essex. Okay. For any further discussion? If not, all in favor of moving this out, say aye. All opposed, abstain, and that passes. We will move on to the final action we've already prepared for, and that is SB 162. And I would entertain a motion, and we'll have any discussion and description. Go ahead. That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move SB 162 favorably for passage out of this committee.
Okay, Representative Miller, seconds. And is there any question for reviser or anything more needs described? Yes, ma'am. Representative Barth.
Thank you, Chairman Berquist. Okay, so, and looking at this bill and with the county commissioners wanting to deal with nuisance, especially here, we're looking at Crawford and Riley County. And I just, look at the experiences of, my district even, and my experiences with the county commissioners. And, often with nuisances and concerns, they often get ignored from the constituents that are in my district with the county and so forth. So I was kind of looking at it from that perspective. I did speak with a person that is from Crawford County after this hearing happened. They informed me that they have no zoning for wind or solar, for example, in their county. And the county approved at one point in time to put wind turbines next to people's houses at a very close range, basically ignoring people in that area's concerns around health and their safety, property values, and potential hazards and nuisance. And so looking at it from that lens, actually this is a question for the reviser here. In looking at page 1, I think it's line 11, basically 11 through 30. So if a resident in Crawford County who has a nuisance complaint, has health and safety complaints, the noise complaints, would that apply from wind turbines specifically? Would this provide them coverage that they would have to have that property abated and removed with the wind turbines? And it also states here that that would be the responsibility and expense of the property owner, which is typically, in my estimates, about a $500,000 expense. Can you help me with that question?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, both acts for both Riley County and Crawford County would require that there be a conviction of a county code violation resulting from the nuisance within the 12 months prior to the county board of commissioners issuing any order for abatement of the nuisance. So there has to be a conviction of a violation first before they can take any abatement action.
As a follow-up question, are you familiar with those codes there in those counties to understand if that would apply?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with the county codes in either Riley or Crawford County. I would have to do some research on those.
I do have a follow-up. So if they had an attorney working with them to help them with that, would that make any difference at all?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure.
I guess without knowing the county code restrictions in that area and what considers a nuisance, I mean, it's hard to say if this is going to help or not.
As with many nuisance complaints, and as I think was stated in the testimony, they're often fact dependent on what the condition of the property is, what is the complaint, the nature of the complaint, and what is the nature of the condition of the property causing the complaint. And all of those factors are considered by the code enforcement office of the county and by the judge when reviewing a potential violation that's brought by the county to the court.
All right. Thank you. And Representative Collins.
Okay, being a resident of Crawford County, I can say that before the wind turbines were put in, there were hearings, or they took public input. There was plenty of time for people to let their feelings be known on that. And I do, like I said, knowing Crawford County pretty well, I do see where this legislation is a need there for the county.
Yes, Madam Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think since I supported the Sedgwick County resolution from the start, that I will remain consistent in my voting and support this also. I will say I have driven past apparently one of the nuisances in Riley County for, 20 years that I've been going to football games. I have never noticed it. So I'm not sure that that would meet legal muster, but I trust that the Riley County court system is very capable and can determine what a nuisance is in their community. So I feel like it's going to be a local issue resolved locally, and then we'll talk about it in 3 years. Is that the sunset? We'll talk about it again to make sure everything's working out.
If there's no further discussion, you can renew your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been so long ago, I forgot what I've moved, but I think we're going to move it. I think we want to take Senate Bill 162 out favorably for passage.
All right, and that's been seconded. All right, all in favor of moving this out, say aye. All opposed? And it's and abstain. So there's a majority. Ayes have it, and that is a done deal. That's an official term for we're finished with that. Now we'll move on to we have completed. All right, we're done. Okay, there is nothing else to attend to today, and we will have an agenda out by noon today for next week. And we appreciate your attendance and appreciate those in the audience and those that testified. Have a good day. We are adjourned.